Greetings, magical mavens. It's Afira here, a witch of hedge, hearth, and harvest. Over the past year or two, I've started sharing my journey deeper into the magic of green living over on my other channel, the Writing Witch channel. But after hearing how much my viewers preferred the earthy content, this spring I felt called to start a whole new channel for this earthy side of my path. And as this is a brand new channel, just for green witchy adventures, I wanted to start by catching you up on how I got to where I am now. Because one thing I've noticed with lifestyle channels and accounts is that there often isn't a lot of apparent context as to what part of someone's journey you're walking in on. And I want this channel to feel welcoming and inspiring regardless of where you're at in your journey toward greener living. I know a lot of the community on my other channel, for example, said that they lived in small apartments in concrete jungles and were watching my videos as inspiration on how they could manifest a more nature-centered lifestyle. And even though I finally manifested a home in a more natural environment with access to a large yard, I want viewers to know that it didn't happen overnight and you can start wherever you are. I manifested this by embracing my nature-based spirituality and taking baby steps to craft the life I wanted over time. And I've by no means fully made it. As I mentioned in my introduction video for this channel, I am still renting, and I'm still kind of on a tight budget right now after a difficult few years in my business. And I'm still working towards my dream of having my own land where I can truly do whatever I want. And I want to take you along with me for that journey, whatever that ends up looking like. So if you're struggling a little bit between what your life actually looks like versus the green witchy cottage lifestyle of your dreams, just know that you're not alone, and I'm here to help inspire you as you go along your journey. If you're coming along from the other channel, and or if you caught the introduction video for this channel, you know that less than a year ago, I felt stuck in an environment that wasn't right for me. A second-story apartment in a busy, crowded industrial area far removed from the beauty of nature. And after years of longing for the green earth, I finally manifested a new home in greener pastures. But you may be wondering how, if I'm so into the natural world, I found myself there in the first place. And the fact is, I had manifested that too. For just like the moon phases and cycle of the seasons, it's been a full circle journey of losing my way and then finding it again. So I invite you to join me for a little story time. I've always been a lover of nature, and I discovered my magical path in my early 20s when I found out it was possible to have nature be the basis of one's spiritual journey. At the time, I lived in a city apartment with no yard or even a small balcony, and I longed to have a home with a garden where I could experience the closeness with nature that I knew was truly meant for me. I started by growing herbs on my windowsill, observing the 8 seasonal Sabbats of the Wheel of the Year, and getting out for walks in nature as often as possible, even if that just meant heading to my local park or admiring the tiny but well-tended gardens of my older neighbors in the city. In my 20s, I lived in an urban area in the heart of the city because that was the fun scene for hippies and artists at the time. I was focused on networking with other creatives and attending events with the local spiritual and New Age community before it was as much of a thing online. Even though it was far from a quiet, countryside cottage witch lifestyle, it was near the city's beautiful Central Park, and since yard space was at such a premium, many of the owners of the old Victorian homes maxed out the little patches of earth they had to create an artful garden walk. It was lovely in its own way. But I wanted more. The spring after I discovered my nature-based spiritual path, I manifested the opportunity to move back into the suburban home my parents had owned since my high school years. And there I started my first real garden. I loved getting to grow my own pumpkins and sunflowers for the first time, as well as connecting with the trees and shrubs and letting my grocery store potted herbs escape into the landscape and take root. I too felt the deep call to put my bare feet on the earth and put down roots. It was there that I got a first-hand experience of the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle that's now the basis of my path as a seasonal witch. It felt like I was truly finding a sense of grounding and belonging as I tended the garden and walked barefoot on the dirt path that was forming along where I water all of my flowers, herbs, crops, and compost. This simpler life closer to nature even inspired my creative process and my career as an artist and content creator, and led to breakthroughs. It was during that time that I got the intuitive inspiration to start designing magical grimoire journals and opened my Etsy shop. I also started my YouTube channel there, filming an introduction to witchy seasonal living, and creating a program that helped to inspire others to connect with the magic of nature and manifest in alignment with the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle of the universe. It seemed like things were really starting to fall into place for me, and I was finally discovering my true calling. But my parents, who were then divorced and living in other cities, ended up letting that property go, and I was forced to find a new place to live at relatively short notice after a little over a year there. I had also recently broken things off with my partner of over 3 years and was just generally feeling rather lost. I realized that most of my friends and the other artists and spiritual business enthusiasts in my community still lived in the artsy part of the city. So I decided to manifest what I saw at the time as the next best thing to getting to stay where I was. An apartment near the Central Park and an old Victorian mansion with at least a patio where I could grow some plants and where me and my cats could get some sunshine. I backtracked from the practical magic dream I had gotten a small taste of and reverted back into my charmed era, so to say. And while I was grateful for that Victorian apartment in some ways, I knew I couldn't stay there long. Not only did I quickly discover that a lot of the things I had previously loved about the city didn't quite exist in the same way anymore, like folks moving away, the spiritual shop where I'd attended women's circles moving out of the area, and friends generally seeming to lose interest in things like the moon circles that I had used to host myself in that area. But there were also problems with the building itself, which had horrible management and unsafe characters living in the other apartments. Things were very messy, and I felt like I was being shown the dark side of living a whimsical, artsy lifestyle. I found myself longing for something totally different. Due to the lack of in-person spiritual gatherings at the time, I also ended up seeking more companionship online and found myself in a community of spiritual business and lifestyle coaches on the internet who were preaching the side of manifestation that's all about luxury and leaving your old modest life behind. And while I'm still grateful to have learned a lot from those experiences and to have gotten some helpful strategies to further establish the side of my business that was centered around helping people live a more manifestation-focused lifestyle, I eventually lost track of my original intentions and found myself feeding into a lifestyle and business model that was all about chasing the next big spiritual modality and creating one coaching program after another to try and cover all the different subjects I was exploring. I somehow got the idea that maybe the simple life closer to nature that I had always wanted wasn't meant for me until maybe my older years. I got wrapped up in the idea that success looked less like living an artsy, nature-based lifestyle and more like traveling to posh destinations and having a clean, crisp, luxury-style apartment closer to things like shopping malls and fancier restaurants. So when things in the Victorian apartment house hit the fan with the crazy neighbors and horrible management, I decided to move to a totally different environment in a part of town where I'd never lived before, while I saved to move somewhere hopefully even more luxurious. On short notice, I found something advertised as a luxury apartment complex in a major shopping area in a nearby suburb. And while it was much more nicely renovated than any of the apartments I had had when I was younger, and I no longer lived next door to a starving artist who was dangerous to themselves and everyone around them, it turned out that those were about the only two good things about it. The area wasn't any quieter or less crowded, and the neighbors and housing management turned out to be just as horrible, just in different ways. And worse yet, I had no friends in this area, and no longer even at least had that sense of beauty, art, and culture that had made the inner city life seem worth the noise and lack of personal space. And the truth is, I had only ever intended for the new apartment to be quite temporary. At the time, I had been laboring under the delusion that A, my boyfriend of the time would eventually come around and want to get a house together somewhere, and then B, once we broke up very shortly after my move, I planned to move all the way away, like to somewhere bigger and more important, like the places where my online spiritual coaching friends lived, and hopefully somewhere where I could find a partner in a whole new dating scene. Well, suffice it to say, neither of those things ended up happening. And thank goodness they didn't. You see, I cast a spell asking the universe to cut out all the BS from my life for the new year. And I got my wish. Literally, on New Year's Eve, some information came out about my boyfriend, and I realized we didn't have a future together. And then, during the first quarter of the year, the big launch of my new coaching program that I had been focusing on was a total flop, kickstarting a year of total decline of the career I had worked so hard to build up. At first, I was really disappointed and felt like everything was going wrong. But over time, I realized I had been headed in the wrong direction in life. Deep down, I had to realize that I didn't really want that boyfriend, didn't really want that career, and almost above and beyond all else was the overarching truth that I didn't really want to move to a bigger and more important city to be like the big and important coaches and podcasters either. I knew I was looking for something more in life, but I had been influenced to believe I had to pick some big shiny goal and run with it, when what I had really needed was time for reflection on my true desires. When the pandemic hit and I had nothing to do but sit there and stare at the mostly empty walls of my boring apartment or on my barely used patio and observe the birds in the tree out front, I looked within and remembered what it really was that I truly wanted. To live a simpler and more quiet life, centered around a home that felt magical, and to be closer to nature again. My friend, whom I had been planning to move to a bigger city with had my career in finances not declined, ended up hating the way the big city was during lockdown and didn't end up staying there for long. So it turned out to be a blessing in disguise that I hadn't been able to go with her. And strangely enough, I ended up meeting my soulmate my first time using a dating app. No bigger city or new dating scene required. But despite being able to now see the hidden blessings in the way things had gone, I was still feeling quite lost. So I continued peeling back all the layers of complexity that my life and practice had taken on in the years since starting my witchy path, and rediscovered the simple joys of seasonal living and spending as much time in nature as possible. I also remembered, after a decade of moving around every few years, that what had brought me to my witchy path in the first place had continued to be a recurring theme. The concept of manifesting and cultivating a home that's in alignment with nature and as a sacred sanctuary. I looked back and realized that my first big spell, as well as most of my big spells afterward, had been to manifest a more supportive place to live. And here I was again in a place that had seemed like it was what I wanted at the time and was in some ways an improvement, but was still not quite what I had hoped it would be. When nothing else seemed to be stable or certain, I finally turned back to that one thing that had always helped me to feel centered, grounded, and inspired in my life and witchy practice: nature and the seasons. It was then that I really dove back into my practice of seasonal living after years of bouncing around with other modalities. This first took form as simply getting a few potted herbs for my patio and revamping the 8 sets of journal prompts that I had created years prior for myself and then eventually had offered to my witchy mentees. A mini grimoire that guides us to set intentions and tap into the 3 most powerful themes of each of the 8 seasons on the witch's calendar. And I began doing my journaling outside as often as possible, being present with the elements and observing what plants and animals I could find in that not-so-natural environment. I was amazed by how much nature was actually there, hidden amongst the noise, traffic, and man-made structures. I discovered what I had previously assumed were obscure witchy herbs growing in parking lots and cracks in the sidewalk. And I met strange exotic birds as they passed through during migration. I received tons of spirit animal messages that helped guide me in my life choices, and I rediscovered my love for things like seasonal eating and aligning my personal development goals with the energies of the Sabbats on the wheel of the year. But this time, I dove even deeper. Instead of just developing seasonal traditions in my mindset and journaling practice, I expanded my seasonal magic more and more into 3D reality, into nature, into the kitchen, into my decorating scheme, and into my daily rituals. And this, of course, quickly led into the garden. I remembered how aligned it had felt to be up close and personal with the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle of seasonal living when gardening had been an active part of my life. Well, I told myself that if I was going to be kind of stuck here in this apartment for a while, I was going to use this temporary apartment as a place to really hone my decorating skills and to max out the 10 by 10 patio to create as epic a garden as possible. Believing in the universal law that what you focus on grows, and that we manifest more space when we fully occupy whatever space we're already in. And to help keep me motivated and inspired, I started my Sabbat series on the Writing Witch channel, where I shared my journal prompts with viewers and responded to them myself in the form of video diaries of my seasonal living practice. And since those videos needed to be produced in advance of the Sabbats themselves, I also began sharing some seasonal vlog-style videos in between. And folks really seemed to enjoy this content where I was cooking, cleaning, decorating, foraging, gardening, etc. So I leaned more and more into vlogging. And I quickly realized that this roundabout journey of getting back into seasonal living was my authentic way of discovering what my true goals and desires really were and aligning with them a little more every day. The more I focused on, talked about, and developed my practice as a seasonal witch, a nature witch, and a domestic witch, the more I manifested evidence that I was becoming who I was truly meant to be. The more time I spent in nature, the more I felt in tune with Mother Earth. The more energy I put into the garden, the more of an actual garden it became. The more time I spent decorating for the seasons and making my boring apartment look and feel more like a witch's cottage, the more decor and household upgrades I received. The more I shared about my seasonal living journey and the wisdom I was discovering, the more aligned my career path became. And I was inspired to start the Writing Witch Patreon as another income stream in addition to my shop, where I could receive in exchange for offering my wisdom and my art in a way that truly benefits other people. The more time I spent playing Kitchen Witch and learning culinary and apothecary skills, the more free food and healing plants found their way into my repertoire. And even though I'll admit there were a lot of tough times when it felt like it would never happen, deep down I intuitively knew that eventually this would lead to energetically and physically outgrowing that space and manifesting a home in which I could really put down roots. Well, at the end of 2023, in the midst of a really challenging time for my family due to the death of my father, the next step to my dream finally came true somehow. Just, of course, not in the exact way that I had envisioned. One of the reasons I stayed in that apartment for as long as I did was because I had it in my mind that I didn't want to keep moving around. I wanted my next move to be into an ideal property that me and my partner would own together. But due to struggles presented by career changes, inflation, unexpected expenses popping up, and a nightmarish housing market, it just didn't seem like that was going to happen anytime soon. And this was yet another lesson in releasing attachment to overly specific outcomes along my manifestation journey, and instead choosing to just take whatever the next most aligned step would be. After years of doing my very best to put love into a home that I kind of hated the management and overall environment of, I finally had the last straw. I received notice that the cost of my rent was going up by hundreds of dollars the following year, and I said no. I deserved better, and this would be my final push to believe it was possible, regardless of the fact that it seemed like all of the odds were against me at the time. Despite family struggles, a super tight budget, and a rather bleak housing market in my area, I burned the renewal notice and the document they wanted me to sign my soul away for another year. I cast a spell to be in a new home in the peace of nature with access to land by the winter solstice at the latest. And even though all the challenges and shadows reared their ugly heads along the way, my spell came to fruition. My original plan had been to move into the house my sister had recently moved out of. I had submitted my application as the landowner had requested, but I never heard anything back. So I searched every corner of the internet for other viable rentals within a reasonable radius of my city, and everything was either unavailable, undesirable, or a scam. Until finally, I got a viewing of a house right around the corner from my sister's old place, but with a larger yard and much more recent renovation of the interior. The landowner was open to renting to a self-employed artist and said I could do whatever I wanted with the back garden. And get this, the cost turned out to be less than what I had been paying at my old place before the new prices that they were proposing for the new year. Talk about an epic manifestation. So here I am, still celebrating the success of my home spell from last year as I get acquainted with this new environment with much more freedom, personal space, and access to nature. Not to mention, this house has a lot more character than the basic square of white walls that I had been trapped in before. So I'm really making the most of the passion for decorating that I began cultivating when I was working with a space that was a much farther cry from the witchy cottage of my dreams. I've spent the winter healing, grounding, centering, and preparing to start my next level homestead in the spring. And now, the seedlings are in the ground. Oh, how joyous it is to finally be able to say that when it seems like all I wanted for years and years was a patch of earth to call my own, even if it is just a temporary stepping stone on the way to owning my own home. For many of us, that's exactly how manifestation actually works, through stepping stones. A lot of the time, the manifestation community tries to lead us to believe that we're not successful manifestors unless we can manifest anything we want within a moon cycle or 3 months or a year, and that quantum leaps are supposed to happen overnight, when the reality is that true success is usually more like the process of gardening. We plant seeds and experiment, and we tend to our seedlings over time, accepting that not every single one will survive, and adjusting our methods, focus, and resources in alignment with what life calls us to do in the seasons of life. In many cases, those seemingly miraculous overnight success stories are A, not as overnight as they appear to be from the outside, B, are not all they're cracked up to be, or C, end up falling apart in the end because the person wasn't truly prepared to maintain the new lifestyle that they were thrown into. Kind of like that statistic of how, most people who win the lottery end up losing all of their money very quickly because they never learned what went into actually maintaining that money and investing it properly. For example, had I succeeded at manifesting a big move to a big city and become an overnight success as a business and lifestyle coach, I would have found myself in a life and career that didn't really bring me the kind of authentic joy that I was looking for deep down, and I probably wouldn't have met my partner when I did. And even when I was more clear on what I truly wanted, I could have manifested owning a piece of land in the country and tried to start a homestead overnight, but wouldn't have had any idea of all of the skills and resources I would need to stay sane and make that work. I'm loving my new suburban home right now, but I'll admit that even just making the move to a slightly more rural area has come with some major unexpected challenges, like dealing with pest control and remembering how physically strenuous actual ground level gardening can be. It's extremely apparent to me now why it was necessary for me to learn as much as I could in the apartment before I would really need those skills. And how necessary my current rental house is as I eventually transition into owning my own home farther out into the countryside. Especially for those of us who are non-specific manifestors via our human design, success looks less like sudden huge shifts that are apparent to everyone on the outside, and looks more like feeling into our wants and needs deeply and sitting with them, and then turning our desires into daily and seasonal rituals and habits that compile over time to create an epic transformation that will truly stick and we'll truly appreciate. For example, when I had to commute in order to get out to the nature parks and discover the plants and animals that I'm so passionate about now, it made me truly appreciate every single little thing about nature. Whereas if perhaps I had been born into a rural environment, I would have maybe gotten tired of it, not appreciated it as much, and wanted a different life. After what I've gone through, I am so much more clear on what my wants and needs actually are, and I have a true appreciation for the skills, experience, and wisdom that needs to go into that dream. I used my previous apartment as a training ground to learn and practice everything I could around green living, gardening, and magical housekeeping, even educating and inspiring myself on subjects that I couldn't take action on within the limitations of the old place. And now I'm getting to put those skills into action here. And in much the same way, I'm doing the same thing here, expanding as much as I can and learning the skills I'll need when I have a home where I can experience a more permanent version of permaculture. And that about catches us up to today. In my next video, I'll begin sharing my current projects and the ins and outs of the green witch / cottage witch magic that I've been learning, practicing, and enjoying. In the meantime, I've been sharing glimpses of some of that with fellow domestic and green witches who are subscribed over on Patreon. I invite you to join me for a free membership to stay in the loop on what magical green living I get up to and to get a sneak peek into what I'm cooking up for future videos. See you there, and until next time, enjoy the seasons and the elements, and don't be afraid to embrace your natural magic. Blessed be.